There are currently 7 cases being taken against the state by current and former serving members of the Air Corps. They believe they have been forced to take the action because the state has failed to protect them from their exposure to toxic chemicals during their service, which led to serious, chronic and fatal illnesses, including cancer. Obviously, those cases will ultimately be dealt with by the court, but that does not prevent the state from taking action. Numerous State Commission reports highlighted health and safety concerns around chemical exposure at the Casement Airdrome in Baldonnel as early as the 1990s, yet no action was taken at the time. In fact, these reports mysteriously disappeared or were ordered to be shredded. Even after litigation commenced in 2013, basic health and safety precautions were not implemented in Baldonnel. It appears that only after a Health and Safety Authority inspection in 2016 that personnel were provided with the very basic precaution of personal protection equipment such as gloves and overalls. Hundreds, if not thousands, of personnel have passed through Baldonnel and may be suffering from chronic and even fatal illnesses as a result of exposure to toxic chemicals during their service. There is also a possibility that family members have been affected, as evidence suggests a higher rate of a variety of health conditions among spouses and children, including stillbirths and miscarriages. Your government has taken no action to find out the extent of this scandal or the number of people that might have been suffering as a result. Instead, you are fighting tooth and nail through the courts, forcing sick people to take a gruelling journey for justice. Compare this with the Australian government. It set up a board of inquiry to conduct a thorough investigation into similar matters. It commissioned a survey of health outcomes for the relevant personnel and their families. A health care system was put in place for those who were affected. Taoiseach, as you know, a protected disclosure from one of the whistleblowers was released publicly recently. It makes for harrowing reading. It is a list of 56 deaths of former serving Air Corps personnel, the average age of 48. All of these specifically relate to those who died before they reached the age of 66. It is based on research of the whistleblower himself in the absence of any state-funded investigation into these matters, but it is by no means exhaustive, and I believe since it was published that there is another number of deaths have been identified. Taoiseach, it is clear that successive governments have failed in their duty of care to the men and women who served in the Air Corps. Your government has the opportunity to do the right thing. We do not want to be here in 10 years' time with a higher death toll, having failed to address this scandal. Taoiseach, have you read the disclosure? Have you responded to whistleblower in question? And do you accept that the time has come to order a full inquiry into these matters?
I think, as the Deputy said, there are currently a number of cases before the courts. And while I have absolutely no doubt that the serious ill health that some former members of the Air Corps have suffered is real, it is unproven as to whether all those illnesses or that array of illnesses could be caused by chemical exposure. Obviously, those cases will be heard in the courts. The courts will hear all of the evidence and will determine whether the claims and allegations that these illnesses were caused, are all caused by chemical exposure will be determined by the courts, having heard all the evidence. And I think that's the right way that this should proceed. The health and well-being of men and women in the Air Corps is, of course, a matter of huge concern and interest for government. The Minister has ensured that allegations relating to the exposure to chemical and toxic substances while working in Baldonnel were independently reviewed. And before considering any further steps, Minister Keogh has asked those who have made the disclosures for their views. Minister Keogh is examining options for next steps in the process in light of the views he has received from those who have made the allegations in the context of ongoing litigation. The independent report considers the Defence Forces health and safety regime and its current policy and application. In relation to historic matters, as litigation had commenced before protected disclosures were made, the report states that the courts are now the most appropriate forum for such matters to be assessed and are best placed to assess all the evidence. Although the report finds that the Defence Force regime appears to be capable of meeting the statutory requirements, it makes a number of observations, including in relation to documentation, health surveillance and exposure monitoring, and also that the Health Safety Authority is the appropriate statutory body to deal with such allegations. Separately and in parallel to this independent review, following an inspection in 2016, the Air Corps has continued to work with the Health and Safety Authority to improve its health and safety regime. It should be noted there is a significant overlap between the recommendations of the HSA and those of the independent reviewer. The military authorities have informed the Minister that the HSE has formally noted the high level of cooperation received from the Air Corps and its considerable progress made to date by the Defence Forces towards the implementation of safety management systems for the control of hazardous substances.
Deputy Snoddy, 1 minute.
Taoiseach, there's no denying that things are better in the Air Corps, but what you have just read out does not address in any way the legacy of bad management, bad health and safety record in the Air Corps. I don't know, Taoiseach, do you remember that you are the Minister for Defence? So you have a direct responsibility to look into these matters. You're also a medical doctor, and you'll understand kind of the list of illnesses that have been provided to your junior minister are very, very serious and often fatal, as the other disclosure has. We don't know how many people have been exposed in an unprotected way because nobody has carried out a survey. The Australians didn't wait for the courts to adjudicate fully. They acted immediately. If people who are victims of exposure to fatal chemicals, and there is a list, albeit partial, which was given to Deputy Chambers, how many of those people have been exposed? Minister, as a doctor, if you don't know what people are exposed to, you cannot help, you cannot diagnose, you cannot prescribe or direct medical procedures. This is about saving lives. Will you act now on the legacy, not on the specific cases, but on the legacy of all of those who are suffering in the general public now?
Taoiseach has 1 minute to respond.
Well, the Deputy is absolutely correct. I am the Minister for Defence, and of course the Government has delegated responsibility for defence matters to Minister Keogh, who I fully trust to deal with this matter appropriately. And I am a medical doctor, and I have seen the list of illnesses that these former members of the Air Corps and their families have suffered. And they are a very long, extensive list of illnesses, including the most common illnesses which most people may encounter. Illnesses such as cancer, cardiovascular disease, suicide, miscarriages by their partners. And as a medical doctor, it's not possible for me to say if exposure to chemicals caused all or any of these illnesses, because these illnesses are commonplace in the community at large. If it was one specific illness resulting from a known chemical that caused that illness, it would be one thing, but these are not the allegations that are being made. And there is litigation in the courts, and the courts are the best place, I believe, to assess this evidence and to see whether the allegations are supported by that evidence.